Hello YouTube, and welcome to my channel. I have decided to start this channel to tell my story as what it was like to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now I know there's a lot of other channels out there where people are doing the same thing, so why would I feel the need to have another? Well, first of all, I just want to add my voice to the conversation, and second of all, I have some experiences that other people may not have had. There aren't very many people who are on YouTube who have been elders before for a period of time that have channels. Myself, I served as an elder for almost 10 years. So I have a perspective that might be just a little bit different. I know there are a few others, but I figured I would add my voice as well, because your experience as an elder can vary quite a bit from congregation to congregation, and this I have discovered. So anyways, briefly, I'll introduce myself as far as my experiences, not my name, not yet, and not my face, not yet. So anyways, myself, I was virtually raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. My mother was baptized when I was very young, right around the time I was starting school, somewhere thereabouts. So for the most part, I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. From early on, I even remember sitting in on my mother's studies and just believing that we were being taught the truth. Because for some reason, even at that age, I believed in God, and that was all I ever heard about who God was, and henceforth I just made the assumption that I was being taught the truth. So I was baptized myself before I was a teenager, always believing what I was taught. And after I was baptized, I would oftentimes use my school vacations to auxiliary pioneer. I had big spiritual goals when I was young. I remember talking about wanting to be a district overseer. Well, I never quite got that far. Anyways, I did get some supplementary education, as they say. There was a brief period of time where that wasn't looked down upon as much as it is now and as it was before. So I snuck into that window and I benefited from that. But after I finished that education, I then proceeded to pioneer. After I stopped pioneering after a while, and then I was a ministerial servant for a couple of years, and then I got appointed as an elder. After I was an elder for a couple of years, I became the secretary, and then after that, I actually coordinated a body of elders for a couple of years. So I have an experience as being a CBOE. And I did serve on more than one body, and I have experience in the foreign language field as well. I've been to Pioneer School, I've been to Elder School at Patterson Bethel, I've been to many KM schools, I've done relief work a number of times, and for those of you who don't know, that's when there's a disaster where a whole bunch of things are destroyed, and you go in to help rebuild, or help people clean up the mess, or what have you. So I've done that a couple times. I've done unassigned territory a couple of times. And what that is when there's an area in the United States where the territory is not assigned to a congregation. There's an arrangement whereby you apply to the branch and they give you an assignment and you drive somewhere and you go and you preach. So I've done that a couple of times, both unassigned and seldom worked. And seldom worked is when territory doesn't get covered. I think it's every year. So I've done that. I've served on the RBC for, I'm not quite sure how long. I'm pretty sure it's more than 10 years though. It must be. I first started before I was a teenager. Back then, that was long enough ago where there weren't all kinds of rules about who could show up on the build. So my friend's father was in the RBC, and we would go with him and we would work on the builds. We did that, and then later on I joined the RBC myself, and I served for, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years, I forget. But I've been to a lot of builds. I've worked on projects, even at circuit assemblies or assembly halls. I've worked on projects there. I've had some pretty big privileges on the circuit and district level. On the circuit level, I got to do the accounts, I got to do sound, and on the district level, I got to do the accounts and I got to do stage. So I was an individual who was trusted because they don't let just anybody handle their money. So I've been around, I've seen things. I devoted my entire life to serving Jehovah. All my decisions were based around how they would help me to serve Jehovah. That's how much of a believer that I was. Now, being raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses when I was growing up, we were basically taught that the end would come at any moment. And the crux of this teaching was based on the fact that the generation that saw the events of 1914 was so old that they would pass away at any minute. Now, I actually remember being at the district convention where the Live Forever book was released. And that was the big study book for Jehovah's Witnesses for a long time. But in that book, and I'm going to cite the fair use section of the copyright laws for the United States, but in that book, in chapter 18, a book released in 1982, one of the paragraphs in chapter 18 basically talks about 1914. It says, this is paragraph 8 on page 154, chapter 18. After drawing attention to the many things that have marked the period from 1914 onward, Jesus said, this generation will by no means pass away until all these things, including the end of this system, occur. Which generation did Jesus mean? He meant the generation of people who were living in 1914. Those persons yet remaining of that generation are now very old. However, some of them will still be alive to see the end of this wicked system. So of this we can be certain. Shortly now, there will be a sudden end to all wickedness and wicked people at Armageddon. So this is published in 1982, and there's a picture directly below that paragraph. It shows a calendar that says 1914, and it shows a little boy, and it shows him progressing to an old man. So the picture is showing that people alive that are now very old, and in big bold letters it says Armageddon. Some of the generation living in 1914 will see the end of this system of things and survive it. So that's what I was taught when I was a child. Based on that, that was published by the organization that called itself God's Organization and that claimed to be spirit-directed. I did not myself at any time assume when the end was going to come based upon things I figured out. I always just believed what I was taught. So when I was a child, the opinion was that I would never even make it out of elementary school before the end of the system of things came. Yet here I am, old enough to have children of myself that could probably be in high school or thereabouts. So, obviously things that I believed to be irrefutable truths didn't quite come to pass. And nonetheless, that didn't quite shake my faith. I kind of wondered for a while about a number of things. It seemed a little bit strange to me, but the way that I justified it in my head was I assumed, well, maybe Jehovah is just allowing more time because there are so many people coming into his organization. So that's kind of how I justified it. And I always put it in the back of my mind. I waited on Jehovah as we were instructed to do. I figured, well, maybe my faith's just not strong enough, or maybe I just don't understand this. Meanwhile, I continued working towards my spiritual goals. So, as a child, being one of Jehovah's Witnesses affected every single aspect of my life. The particular congregation I was in, there were actually a number of kids that were my age or thereabouts, and so I had friends, and that was never an issue. That being the case, though, I always viewed people at school as in a different category than my friends, than Jehovah's Witnesses. We were taught that worldly people, whether or not they were really bad, as in doing horrible things, they were still considered bad association. They might look like they're good people, but they weren't worshippers of Jehovah, so they weren't the type of people that we wanted to associate with. So, based on that, I never had any friends in school. Let me explain that. I would go to school and I would talk with people, I would interact with them, I would have a good time. They would be my friends within the setting of school. But once I left school, I never associated with them or hung out with them or did anything with them. So when I say they weren't my friends, that's what I meant. So the friends that I would associate with and do things with were all Jehovah's Witnesses. And myself, as I said, I really believed Jehovah's Witnesses taught the truth. So I developed the standards that we were taught to have as Jehovah's Witnesses. And that standard is that the more spiritual things a person is doing, such as going to meetings, participating in field service, having spiritual goals, and those spiritual goals meant that you wanted to do things that the organization prescribed as works for God. So people that were more spiritual were people that I tended to be drawn to. And we were always taught that the happiest people were those that were serving Jehovah as fully as they could within the organization. So such people as pioneers, who at that time had to spend 90 hours a month preaching, they were always held up as examples of the happiest people there were. And the same was said of those who would serve at Bethel, and so on and so forth. So even within Jehovah's organization, which was supposed to be the happiest organization on earth, the happiest people were those who devoted the most of their time to serving Jehovah. So I always honestly believed that. It seemed to me to be true. So I always had goals to serve Jehovah. A lot of people had those goals because they felt that was the only way they could really have that level of happiness. I had those goals for that reason, but also because I honestly felt that was the true way to serve God as best I could. So I lived my entire life with the idea of being the best servant of Jehovah that I could. And as I said before, that took me to some interesting places. As I've started to explain, it affected my entire childhood. I never really had friends outside of the organization. I would be friendly with people, but it would always end there. And there's a lot of peculiar things about growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. When you believe that you're not going to get out of elementary school or out of high school, it affects your viewpoint on the way that you live life. And it was designed to do that. The purpose was to make people want to serve Jehovah as much as they possibly could, because the system was going to end at any second now. So what value is there to doing anything but serving Jehovah, because anything you build up now is going to be gone. And that's the way that I felt. I believed what I was taught. I didn't assume those things on my own. So I never spent a lot of time focusing on things other than spiritual things. That being said, though, I've done okay for myself, partly because I come from a family that happens to be gifted with intelligence, and so we were able to utilize that to our benefit. But that being said, whenever I had issues or questions about things I was taught, I would always toe the line. I would study them and think, well, this doesn't make a lot of sense, so I'll just wait on Jehovah until I understand it better. And there are times I did that going all the way back to my childhood. I would pick up on things that just didn't make sense to me. I would look further into them and they still didn't make sense, so I would just forget about it. In fact, I remember one time, I can't have been 7 or 8 years old, but I asked my mother, I said, but how do they know that in Matthew 24 that Jesus was referring to Daniel chapter 4 and the 7 times? How do they know that? She couldn't answer the question. She said they just know, and that was the end of it. So I assumed I should just take it on faith and forget about it. And I did that for a number of years, and the end continued not to come. And I continued to live my life the way I was instructed to as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'm sure that for anybody who's one of Jehovah's Witnesses, if you step back and look, a lot of really weird things happen that just don't really make sense, and you just you deal with them as you do. Some people get all bent out of shape, some people just ignore it. I was in the latter category. I just ignored it for a very long time, and I climbed up the spiritual ladder. Anyways, though, this is just the introduction to my channel. I wanted to put that out there, as interesting and as strange as it might be. I think in my next video I'll talk a little bit more about growing up and as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and perhaps after that I'll talk a little bit more about being an elder, because there's a lot to be said for being an elder. Anyways, thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.